And this question has just come to me in listening to your last response. I've had the very unusual experience of having three separate occasions in my life where I was part of discovering previously unknown writings by people, and then going through them and editing them and publishing them as books, posthumously published books. First time in 1990, after Greenleaf died, his children sent me his personal papers and began to go through them, and was astonished to discover ultimately almost 100 pieces of writing that he had done for exactly the same reason that you described just now, as a means of working through his thinking on a whole host of topics. And he did this over a 50-year period. He would write these pieces anywhere from 2 pages to as long as about 110 pages was the longest one. When he got to the point where he felt he had worked it through, he filed these. He published what he wanted to publish in his lifetime. These were all things that he wrote as a means of learning, for his own self-learning, and then filed them away. He didn't throw them, but he threw them away. He filed them away. And it was those pieces that I discovered that, and that in 1996 became published by Josie Bass as On Becoming a Servant Leader and A Seeker and Servant. Many years later, again, a board member and friend, Bill Bodum, passed away several years ago, and I knew two pieces he had written, was familiar with that, and none of us had any reason to think that he had actually written much beyond those two pieces. But again, I asked the family if I could go down into his basement and went through his boxes of materials, and lo and behold, we found about 1,100 manuscript pages that he had written over about a 40-year period, and a book has just been published of that. And then John Donnelly, who was a Michigan businessman, a similar thing happened, and I helped a friend and colleague to produce a book called The Human Treatment of Human Beings that was published last year by the Scanlon Foundation. With that as a background, I'm just curious to ask you, have you published pretty much everything you've written and wanted to publish? Or are there writings that you have done over the years that may be sitting in your files?
I don't have the kind of repository of writings to be discovered posthumously at all, like Robert Greenleaf did and others. I just don't have that. They've either been thrown away and replaced by something that did get published, or they've been published because I have something they didn't have at the time, I think, and that is a bi-monthly that Josie Bass Wiley Company publishes called Board Leadership, that Miriam Carver, my wife and colleague, and also authoritative source about policy governance, we edit that and we write for that. So we have, if you will, a captured publication. So a lot of things, if I really think it's worth publishing, or the same thing goes for her, we will publish in that. So we have an outlet. And that probably plays down the number of things, but it also gets more things written, because I'll write for that when otherwise I might just not think about writing it. So I don't think I do have a repository to be found later. The closest I have would be not on governance at all, but on philosophy and politics, mainly the philosophy, with friends, of email exchanges, some of which became rather voluminous, you know, and a lot of that not because I needed to communicate that much or that exactly to these old classmates that I correspond with, but because I wanted to be able to say something and put it in words as part of the argument or the discussion we were having. So I just kind of made a paper out of it, because that's kind of my way to do it. Now all that shows up in emails over the time. Strangely enough, several of those have now been published, totally apart from governance entirely, more in a philosophical vein.
I'm curious also to ask, have you thought about, or have you made arrangements for the disposition of your written work, whether it might go to a university library? Is that something you've thought about or made any decision on?
Well, there's no. I have made no disposition plans for my written work because there's no written work that isn't all to speak of that's not already in the public domain.
Are there original drafts, though, of materials that you reworked, or does that not exist?
Probably doesn't. It probably doesn't exist as a separate thing. In other words, when I draft something, I keep changing it until I get it where I want it to be, and what the pieces of it leading up to that are just discarded for the most part.